All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another Future Focus where we are living at the intersection of business technology and the human experience. And I am looking forward. If you've listened to my show for any period of time, you have heard Ben Eubanks on my show before because we have had multiple conversations. They are always some of my favorite. And when I actually look at the data, Ben, I don't know if you know this, your conversations with me are actually some of my top ones. So I think the listeners will be just as excited. And this was a little bit of a last minute shift, which is why the timing's different. But Ben, I so am thankful that you were able to join me. And we're going to be talking about really a little bit of a look back on some of the data. For those of you who don't know, Ben leads a research firm on this. And so he's been doing research on what's really been going on in the space of work over 2023. So we're going to take some of those. We're going to talk about some of those lessons. And then we're going to do our best to predict how do we think this may influence 2024? Because I don't know about you, but it's crazy to think we are less than 2 weeks from 2024. That is strange. So thank you, Ben, for joining me.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here, Christopher. Looking forward to this. And I can't say that I've looked at the data on the conversations that I've had with you, but I do know the day after that, I feel like more peppy, more excited, more like, all the things a little brighter around me. So you bring that kind of joy to my life. And I think to everybody else that listens in to the stream as well.
Well, you know what? That's fantastic because there is no shortage of, I did a poll because I don't know about you, but I've seen a lot of layoffs happening this time of year. It's a tough time. So if we can bring joy and encouragement and excitement to people for the end of the year and early 2023 or 2024, I am all for it.
Did you forget what year we're in? Goodness gracious. I just learned to write 23 and now we're going to change over and I'm going to write that for the next 2 months because I get
you just got there, like just the last check. You're like, finally, I got this one right. Shoot.
I was going to make a joke about writing checks. You beat me to it. Goodness. People are like, what are those things? Okay.
I know. What's a check? Yeah. All right. Well, so let's talk a little bit about this because you did some research on this and I'm trying to remember what you said, the 3 areas. So you looked at, what were they again? What were the 3 big areas you dug into this year?
Yeah. So goodness, our research runs the gamut. So talent acquisition, learning development, career mobility, employee well-being, like a little bit of everything that touches on what the workforce is dealing with, what we are dealing with as we're serving the workforce. So a couple of big ones this year we hit on from the very beginning were employee well-being. We knew that was going to be a big deal because we looked at the research last year and we've done over the last year, and we saw that employers are saying, look, we're making these changes. We rate ourselves as like a C. You're like, we're not terrible. We're doing pretty good. When you ask employees, they're like D minus. I'm not feeling it is kind of the employee response there. So that was one of the big things. The other one was employee belonging. Look, we've done a lot of measuring in our research this year when we're working on workforce surveys, asking them about their measure of employee belonging. We actually do a calculation on that and use that to cut the data. And as you'd imagine, there's some wild stuff in learning and elsewhere that we see. And the third one was just broad. People want to move, mobility, growth. So whether they're in their company moving, I don't know if you saw the data that came out in the last 2 years, like talking about the loyalty tax, really trying to paint that picture. But Christopher stays with company X for 10 years, earns less money after 10 years than Ben, who jumped to 2 different companies in that time, because when you jump, you usually get some sort of increase. So the career mobility thing is a big deal, whether you're staying inside the company and we're prioritizing that, or they're moving to another organization.
Well, and that's a really important piece. What you just described there is actually a really important of mobility that needs to be considered with that. Because a lot of times we're like, yeah, it's mobility, but a lot of times people leave a company and go to another company because internal mobility sometimes is the least financially rewarding mobility you can get, because it's like, well, yeah, I could go take this bigger job and take on this more responsibility for a, single digit pay increase, or I could take a lateral move to a different company and potentially go up 20%, something like that. And
we'll give you a slightly used stack of Post-it notes as your congratulations for your new role, Christopher. There you
go. Aren't you thrilled with the opportunity? And by the way, because you're still in the company, you also kind of still have to do your old job because everybody still remembers that you were in that job. So a little bit of 2 jobs.
Yes.
Okay. So what were some of the things one of the ones you hit on, which doesn't really surprise me, was that, organizations might be like, hey, I think we're doing okay. and the employees within them go, not necessarily agreeing on that. But were there any other standout things that jumped off the page?
Yes, the thing that strikes me is anyone listening in here probably is of the same mind as us. Like, we want to do the right thing by our people. We want to serve our people. If you're listening to this, you probably are leaning that direction. Okay, we've got a little sample.
Yeah, I
bias
don't know a whole lot of people who think I hate people. I
let's
don't care
wreck
about anyone.
this
You know
whole
what
thing,
show
burn
I'm
it
going to
down.
listen to? Christopher's show, because that's the kind. Unless they really like raging out and this is like fuel for their anger, then they might listen.
I'm going to make a list of the things I'll never do for my people, and they're listening to your show to get that. So if you are one of those people listening and like, I really want to serve our people well, the thing that gets me is employers were truly making positive changes. They were adding new benefits. They were saying, we've created a culture where people can actually go to their leader and say, listen, I'm having a hard time right now. And they're not going to get shouted down or booed out of the room. So those changes are good. But the hard part is we can make any decision we want to up here at the highest levels, but it really makes or breaks it when it gets to that level of my direct leader and how they interact with me. So we can say we believe in well-being, we believe in supporting our people, we believe in really being open and transparent. But then Ben's boss is like, yeah, just get back to work. We've got to meet this quota. And it doesn't matter what you said from an organizational perspective. So I think that's part of the breakdown that we see when we look at the actual data. And we did this 2 years ago. We looked at this actual data. The people who were least positive were the employees. The people that were next most positive were the managers and leaders outside of HR. And then the people who were in the human resources, like Pollyanna, like, we're rocking this. Look at us, baby. So that was the challenge there. And I'm careful not to just wag my finger and point and say, listen, we're screwing this up, because I think people truly are making the right changes. But we think that making that change is okay. We're done. We've arrived. And you and I both know that making that change and then telling people about it and socializing that are very different things.
Well, and I think one of the things you hit on there that is an important message to reinforce is, I really would say generally, are there exceptions to this rule? Yes. But I would say generally, I agree that most organizations, most senior leaders, they really do want to do the right thing.
Yes.
I mean, they really are trying to make things a better place. They are trying to do some of this. I think where it sometimes bumps into it is, one, to your point, the disconnect between, hey, this decision was made, and then the execution of it. Best intentions, execution doesn't always play out that well. But I think sometimes the other part that's really tough is, it's one thing to say you want to do something, but when push comes to shove and things get tight, where are you going to go?
Yes.
And I think that's sometimes when an organization may have the best intentions, but suddenly you go into a really tough season. 2023 was probably one of the most disruptive years I've seen for a lot of companies, just going, I don't even know what tomorrow brings. Like, my strategy's here, and then OpenAI makes an announcement. Now I'm wondering, are we even going to go there? And this is so, when you run into that, I get it's really hard for organizations to actually follow through and go, yes, we actually do want you to do this, even though right now everything is telling me we need to focus all our attention on these crises.
Yeah. Yes.
Crises.
Okay. How to stay away from words that I don't know how to pronounce them. All of the crisis events. There we go.
Yeah. There you go.
But that's a good one. Okay. So one that's related to that. The other one I mentioned was the employee belonging piece. So you actually had, I'll say it's the pleasure of meeting George Rogers on my team. He's been kind of spearheading this over the last year, looking at our data on a DEI lens, looking at belonging data specifically. And when we do a survey with the workforce, whether it's something on learning, whether it's something on employee well-being or something else, we ask them about their degree of acceptance, respect, and appreciation they feel at work, because blended together, that's what the belonging truly is. And so if you separate them out, you'd imagine there's probably some differences there. And some of the things that we see, I'll throw some stats out really quickly. So if an employee is high belonging compared to those who are low belonging, they're 7.5 times more likely to say that your organization is open and transparent. Okay, just how they feel there.
Okay.
They're 2.5 times less likely to have plans to quit their job. That it's not on their roadmap at all. And then they're 5.5 times more likely to say, hey, listen, Christopher, I want you to know that the company I work for, I know you've got a job, but they are just a great place and they treat me so well. And I really love working there. They're 5.5
If you feel like it's home, if you feel like you have a place, it would make sense that you would say, it has a ripple effect where not only are you more likely to be engaged and happy where you are, but you're going to tell other people, hey, it's pretty great over here. The water's fine. You want to come in, jump in the pool.
Yes. So that's exciting to me. There was one in there that one of the data points that really got me was we looked at a learning study and we said, okay, what sort of learning do you want as an employee? Do you want things
Okay.
to improve your skills for now? Do you want to improve your skills for later? Do you want things for, like soft skills and things that are kind of evergreen? And if someone was low belonging, their answers were like, not really interested at all. I don't want any of this.
Yeah,
Leave me alone.
I can
Was
see
kind of
that.
their response. And
Yeah.
again, we can understand that. If you've been in a workplace before, any of you where your manager was a jerk or you feel disconnected from people around you or not respected, like, hey, do you want this other thing? You're like, no, not really. Like I only have a
Not really.
your
I don't
basic
really
needs
want to
met.
have anything to do with any of you.
Just
I
if you
just
could
want
just
to,
leave me alone, I'd be okay
if
with
you could
that.
just leave me alone, that would
But
be great.
what and the thing that I realized as I started sharing some of that data is I was like, wait a minute, I got to be careful with this. I don't want an employer to hear that and think, oh well, Christopher's just doesn't feel like he belongs.
Mm,
Let's shoo him along. No, this is an opportunity for us to flip the switch back on, to re-engage them, because the people across the board, the ones that said, yes, I do feel connected, like all their answers are completely the opposite. Like, I want all this stuff. I want to learn all the skills. What do you need me? Like, put me in, coach. Like, let's do this thing.
yeah.
And so
So
you
how
see
do
a
you
very
move the
different
people
response.
from status A to status B and say, how do we get those, instead of going, you know what, people in group A, they're a lost cause,
They're
instead
dead to
go,
me.
well, what do we
Yes.
do to invite them in? Because if we do, it's going to pay 10x dividends on whatever we do to get them there.
Yes. So getting those leaders involved that are going to reconnect with them, because even if all of us have the best intentions, we can't do that down to the employee level. So we're going to have leaders in charge of them, supporting them, serving them on a regular basis that are really connected. I don't know if I've told you this, but it was like a funny moment for me. We did some research on what it takes to really connect with your people from a leadership perspective. And my style is, we're in a meeting, like, okay, we got to do ABC. Let's go get those things done. Who's got an idea? Let's make this happen. And I was hoping the data would show that's the way to go. Like, that's great. But instead, the research showed you have almost a 0% chance statistically as a leader supporting your people if you don't first really get and understand them. And so
Yeah.
I've got to back up a little bit when I started meeting, like, how's your dog? How are your kids? Everybody good? And that's not how I'm wired. And so I'm very
Yeah.
open about that. Like, I have to be careful because
You
my own
have to be
style leans into
intentional
that.
about it.
And yes, if I want my people to feel like I'm supporting them and serving them and teaching them and working with them as a leader, I can't just dive into all the stuff and go on to the next thing. The facts only. It's got to be human. It's got to be connected. And that doesn't surprise anyone probably to hear that. I was hoping the data would reflect it, but
No,
that's
but I think, yeah, you were hoping the data would say, no, my way is actually the better way.
yes.
No, but I think it's great to hear the data supports it,
Mhm,
because anecdotally, you're the data guy. I'm not.
mhm,
I'm more the, like, I read other people's data and look through my own experiences and conversations, and consistently, that I think one of the things that's interesting though is, and maybe you've experienced this since it's not your natural,
mhm.
I think sometimes people think it's harder than it is, which is why it can be something that's like, I don't have time for that. I'm not good at that. And going back to that sense of belonging, we're not talking about scheduling therapy sessions with each one of your individual direct reports and having these deep, long, deep seated. It really can be as simple as being intentional about making time and actually just checking in. I mean, it doesn't have to be this massive thing. And I think sometimes
Yes.
people overcomplicate it and then they just go, I can't do that. I'm not good at that.
Yes. You imagine it's as hard as like wallpapering a room or something like that. You're like, does anybody do that anymore? I don't even know. But you imagine
I
something
don't know.
really difficult and physical. Like, I've never done it, but I've seen it and it seems hard. Like, I don't even want to do that. I'll stay away from it. And we shoot ourselves in the foot when we do that, because we're missing
Yeah.
a chance to connect with someone more deeply. And all of the evidence I've seen, all the anecdotal and the actual research shows that when I'm willing to put that extra effort in, if it's just 10% more effort, it's not 2x, it's 10% more effort as a leader to connect more deeply with someone, that's going to pay off. There's a return there. They're willing to go an extra mile when I ask them to, when they can stop or they can do one more step and really make sure that customer is totally satisfied. They'll take that extra step to do that. And it comes down to, I'm going to be willing to put that a little bit extra in there.
Yeah.
There's all
On
kinds
this,
of,
on this topic though,
yeah.
I think one of the things, and this is where we're freestyling, right? So this is how we'll roll
No
with
one
it.
noticed that.
But I think one of the things, wicka. The thing I think is fantastic though about this is one of the biggest pushbacks I hear at this is one, I mean, there's a skill piece, and there is a legitimate skill of
Yes.
knowing how to connect with people. And that got disrupted because even people who maybe were better at connecting with people suddenly got thrust into the digital world where it was like, now I'm really uncomfortable with this because maybe I could connect when it was water cooler or at lunch, but now I'm doing it over Zoom and it's weird and I don't. So there is a skill piece to it. But I think one of the other big pushbacks I hear to this is I don't have time for that. And if anything, this to me is where I'm so encouraged by what AI is actually doing is, at least in my opinion, if AI isn't giving you more time to focus on that, you're using it wrong. And to me, that's one of the biggest things is AI should be taking some of these robotic, task-driven, mechanical things that is eating up your busy work. And granted, you have to be intentional because otherwise you'll just fill it with more busy work. But it really should be giving us more time. And where I'm seeing the big differentiator is the folks who are going, hey, this is freeing up time. So I do have time to check in on this person. So I do have time to focus on building relationships instead of building PowerPoints, which is adding absolutely zero value to the organization.
I need you to stall for a minute. I'm looking at some brand new data that just came in this morning. Some brand new data, 1,000 employers. And I'm trying to look at that because we asked them questions about, would you be comfortable using AI to support your people, support your managers, helping them be more effective? If so, how would you do that? There were a portion of companies that said, absolutely not. We will not be using this and we have no interest in it. But a portion of them were like, yeah, absolutely. And here's the ranked list. I'm trying to find that really quickly while we're talking through this, because I wondered how long it would take you to get to AI. And it was like right at 16 minutes exactly. So people can timestamp that one for future posterity. And remember, that's how
I promise we're not going to talk about AI the whole time, but I think it's one of these things where everything we're talking about to me is one of the big is threatening to this in a bad way, in that AI, I think, has the potential to drive to more isolation. It can make us more isolated. Well, why do I need to collaborate with the team? I'll just talk to ChatGPT. Well, if you want to be miserable, then that's a fantastic way to go about life. But it doesn't have to do that. You know, could you use AI to just keep doing more and more busy activity and fill your time with just whatever it is you do on 10x? Well, you could, or you could say, I'm going to deliver on what I am at a higher level value, and then use that additional time to build stronger, more meaningful relationships. And kind of on that topic, one of the interesting things, I was talking to the CEO of ASAP, a coaching company. And one of the things that was really interesting in my conversation with him was he was talking about some of the data they were finding is coaching, individual coaching, and this isn't saying don't do individual coaching. So anybody listening or watching, don't take it as that. I don't need any of the emails afterwards. But what he was saying was, done in isolation, individual coaching can actually lead people to be disengaged and leave. Because what can happen is that individual starts growing, they start building things, and everyone around them is not. And pretty soon they start becoming frustrated that the people, they're almost growing in isolation, and they become more isolated from the people around them. And they also see themselves growing and maturing and people around them staying stagnant, and they get more frustrated with their environment and they go, forget this, I'll go do this somewhere else. And so they're finding you have to be able to incorporate the interpersonal team dynamics into coaching, because if you don't, it actually can have a whiplash effect on engagement. And I was like, it doesn't surprise me one bit based on human behavior, but I think this connection and interpersonal piece is going to be huge as we move forward.
I'd love to know if there's a difference there between an external coach, someone outside who's like a contractor or consultant, or someone who's internal as a coach, because you see that in relationships where you build these, like my daughters, like they build a friendship with someone out here, and the other bridge over here to the old friend starts to deteriorate if they're not actually maintaining that. And so if we're building a bridge to a new coach, and that becomes our strength in our connection, because they listen to us, they talk to us, guess what, our manager may not be doing that. And so we're starting to build this connection somewhere else, and it just reinforces how bad it is behind you. So do you want to
right, it does. It just starts to bring to light some of these other things. And again, it doesn't surprise me that all of a sudden, I mean, anybody who's worked really diligently on building skills or improving themselves at work can probably relate to that, where you start going, well, now I'm kind of like frustrated because nobody else is doing this and we're not growing as a team, and complacency seems to be what everyone else is fine with and I'm not. And that does lead you to start being like, well, now I don't know how I feel about being here anymore. I think I want to go do something different.
Excellent. I'm going to quiz you live here. Are you cool with that? I'm going to ask you what you think the
Go
answer
for it.
is.
Am I fine going off the cuff about just about anything? You said you wanted to get me on a panel and just ask me random questions to see how I'd handle it. So
These
yes,
are slightly
I'm fine.
less
Quiz
than
me live.
random, but we're
Okay, no, that's fine.
towing that
We're
line.
on topic.
Okay,
Yeah, we're on
so
topic.
everybody, we finished a study earlier this fall called PEACE, Performance Engagement and Culture Enablement, and it was a workforce study. So we surveyed over 1,000 workers. What's going on at work? How do you feel? Are you getting developed? Do you get recognized for your efforts? All that kind of stuff. We just finished the employer side of that. And that's the data I was talking about a minute ago. So I have this sitting right in front of me. This has never been shared anywhere. So you get the first little glimpse and peek of this. And one of the questions in there that I asked is, which of the following situations would your organization be okay with using AI coaching for managers? Okay. And only 13%, I'll give you this one. Only 13% said we wouldn't want any of these. No coaching for managers at all. So overall, pretty positive. But which one of these do you think was the number one answer? Examining employee feedback for manager skill gaps, helping managers give better and more useful performance feedback, or supporting managers in growing their soft skills? Which one of those do you think might be number one?
And who was the one voting on this?
HR
Was it the
population
managers
responded to
themselves?
this. No, this is an HR population answering this.
I'm going to guess the HR's view on this would be managers improving their soft skills.
Number two. Number one was helping managers give more useful performance feedback. I guess because eventually that'll flow back to HR.
Actually really interesting. Okay. I guess, you know what? If HR was the audience, it would make sense that that's where they would gravitate to. I mean, I think all of them could be potentially valuable. To me, though, the feedback from employees and making sense of that for yourself, to me, I think would actually be some of the most valuable stuff you could use AI for is, hey, here's what people think of you and what you could do differently. While that's an ugly look in the mirror sometimes, that could be some of the most helpful to go. And it'd probably be a lot easier to hear that from AI than it would say your boss.
Christopher, can I tell you the 7 things you've done wrong lately?
Right. Like, but I think AI, I mean, anybody who's interacted with OpenAI knows how good it can be at saying things in a way that you're like, oh, okay, that's fair type of a thing. So I could see people being a little more comfortable with AI. Although, I don't know, you might run into the same thing where managers are like, that's just AI saying
that's
that.
Just how does it know, really? Like, it's not living this life. But
it's hallucinating. It's hallucinating. That's what it's doing.
Best manager ever. Now who's hallucinating? Okay. But so
I just am now picturing the Michael Scott Cup, like best boss.
World's best boss. The reason I asked that question, though, is I keep running across these technologies, tools, solutions, and I know you've seen plenty of them that help coach managers that kind of sit behind them. And I've said, in a perfect world, if any of you think about the best leader you ever worked for, who cared about you, made you feel respected, who believed in you maybe before you believed in yourself, all those things, that leader, if you could copy and replicate those behaviors that they exhibited across all of your managers, like the landscape of the work we do would be very, very different. It would change everything dramatically. I can't even picture hardly what that would look like, but we don't live in that magic world of fairies and unicorns. And so don't tell my 7-year-old, but no unicorns, Skittles, however that Skittles and rainbows. But the opportunity here is we're using AI, we're using these tools to help increase their performance. A lot of the research is out there showing when they're doing experimentation with certain types of jobs, so that they may never be the top performer, but if it can raise their performance up to some level even higher than it was, that's a good place. It's a good place to be. And that's the vision here. It's not like replacing us and replacing all the manager connections and trying to make them superhuman. It's just, if you could be 10% better, 20% better, that'd be a good place for all of us to be, especially the direct reports for those leaders.
Well, and I think this also opens the door for helping people understand what their role is in it. I was actually surprised. I can't remember which report I was reading that it was talking about AI usage and how many people are using it. And for me, it's the water I swim in. So I forget that's not the norm. But it was interesting to see that I think it was like 90% or more use generative AI products maybe weekly. So we're still very early in the adoption phase, despite all the hype. Even when I talk to people who are very much in it, they're like, well, I have it help me write an email or something like that. But these more complex, like, hey, can it analyze this information and help me make better decisions? And I think largely that's driven by people are still figuring out what role it plays. And it's a little bit of a threat to their identity. And I think we still need to do some serious work in that area, which I think the work you're doing, the work I'm doing to try and help organizations know this isn't about, despite the fact I know of several companies that are building AI employees that you can hire, that to me is not the path that companies should be thinking like, hey, how do we just wipe out our workforce and go key in what we want in employees and then have a bunch of AI employees? I mean, you could do it, but to your peril would be my opinion.
The Seth Godin, one of the world's most amazing marketing minds, a couple of years ago, someone said, tell me what you see as kind of the future of work. And he said, any job that I can fully define, I can find someone else to do it cheaper. Right? If I can tell you at Thursday at 2 p.m., here's what you're going to be doing for the next half hour. If I can define it that well, then I can automate that, or I can find someone else.
Yes.
I can outsource that. But many of us do work, even if it's, mental work, it's not something that's that predictable yet. And so it's one thing to say, oh yes, I can go and scrub this list and clean the list and plug it into your CRM. Like that's just looking at a bunch of data and doing something there that, yeah, sure. Great. That's an AI employee. Wonderful. Whatever you want to call it. That's not even, yeah. But for most of us, we're doing work that's too complicated for that, or there's a human element to it. And there's a cost to pulling that out. And I've always said that there are companies who have done this, or there's this pendulum that swings from like, we're not doing it. This companies are like, no AI at all, to the other ones that are like, yeah, let's automate the heck out of everything. Let's go for it. And those that go all the way to the extreme are going to have some sort of blowback, some kind of pushback.
I've already been in conversations with leaders who have stepped that far in 2023 and thought, hey, we could just have AI do these things. And I think one of the challenges we're in right now is going back to the point of, and this all ties back to the belonging and the role of leaders in this. A lot of decision makers and leaders are not intimately aware of the work that happens in their organizations. Mm-hmm. And so it's very easy to make assumptions about what can be automated and what cannot. And some of the leaders that I've talked to so far, that's what's happened. It's like, oh, that group, they just do this so we can automate it. And they don't realize all the intricacies and the complexity that goes into it. And I know someone recently who got fired, or not fired, laid off. They got a call like a month later where the company went, we're rebuilding that team now. We're doing it differently, but we're actually rebuilding the whole team. You can probably guess what their answer was when they said, would you like to come back? It was, yeah. But I mean, I think we're going to see more of those mistakes in 2024 because there is a lot of pressure to do more, to move faster. The AI is advancing. And I think there are going to be people who make some mistakes.
I know you promised this wouldn't be the whole AI episode, but I'll tell you, I want to mention a Harvard study in a minute, because there was a really interesting Harvard study within our bubble of HR and talent that was really intriguing. Okay. But the other thing I talk about, every analyst, research nerd in the space has to have like a 2x2 grid of something. And so mine is what should be automated, what shouldn't. And so if it's human focused versus process focused, the human side, let's hold on to that. That's stuff for us. That's what we're made to do. That's what we're good at. The process focused may be a candidate for automation, but it also is on that axis that I just mentioned a minute ago, where it's predictability. The more variable something is, the more we have to step in and do it, the more predictable it is. If it's processed and predictable, hand it off, get rid of it. There's lots of things like that we could absolutely do and be totally fine with.
Yeah. There
was a really interesting study from Harvard that looked at recruiters using AI. And what they found was recruiters who use what they called strong AI, who seemed very smart, capable, predictive, they were much more likely to just let their hands off the wheel and just let it go. Just let it make all the recommendations and hire those people, and ended up making a lot of poor choices over the course
surprise.
The recruiters who use what they called weak AI, which was narrowly defined, only looked for certain things, was not like, just go pick Christopher, but hey, here's a set of candidates. You need to look at these and figure out which one's the best. We've down selected for you. Those recruiters are much more likely to keep their hands on the wheel and more likely to make better decisions long-term. So I think that's a great reminder for us that there's a middle ground between like, let's see where this thing goes. Like, let's sit back and get the popcorn and just watch. And there's another between like,
Yeah.
let's just put our head in the sand and say this stuff is all crazy. It's way out there. No, one needs this, because both of those are two ends of the extreme that are not going to be wise long term.
Well, and I just think about a conversation I had a couple of weeks ago about this, and it was a really practical one. I was talking with somebody who owns they have a PR firm, and they were talking about how they're using AI to streamline some of the operations of things. And one of the things that, as you can imagine, a PR firm does is they create a lot of media. And what they talked about was the fact that they don't necessarily, they're using AI to generate some of the media, but they still have the same number of people. It's just those people are focused on different things. So they're focused less on the raw generation of the media content and more on the editing and the refinement, because they know, going back to your point of where's their consistency or where is there a need to go, we really need to focus on this because of this that's going on, or we know this person's concerned about this, where AI is going to grab kind of, here's the most general stuff that we can find in here. You need that person to go, well, right, but situationally, we know this is happening right now and there's this risk. And so we need to make sure and to me, I was like, yeah, that's exactly it. So his model was, we went from 80% of our time on content generation and 20% to editing to 20% on content generation and 80% on editing. And we're just building higher quality, more specific targeted products, which I'm like, well, that's great. Cause yeah, you could just churn out 10x more media things that are all generic crap, but then that's not really adding any value to the system.
I posted a piece last week on how generative AI is being used across the talent acquisition function. And when I checked yesterday, it's been seen like 40,000 times, because everybody's like, what's really happening here? Everybody's talking about it, but what's actually going on? So a bunch of logos on there and kind of showing where the peaks are in terms of priority. And the content generation is where the two peaks are. Creating content outreach to candidates, or responding back to those who didn't get the job, or tailoring that piece of it a little bit to your culture, your tone, the job, any of those kind of things, or just generating something brand new from scratch at the job ad, a job description, those kinds of things are the two big peaks there.
Yeah.
Because that's the least risky thing, to just create something and then edit it as a human.
Well, and if you want to see AI gone wrong, and I think this goes back to, for people who may be concerned about this, because this actually ties to this, and I actually want to bring it back to like belonging and all of this as well. But for folks who may still be a little concerned about where this could go, I did a weekly update on this last Friday as kind of a new thing I'm doing. And just Google AI Sports Illustrated, and you will see what happens when a company says, hey, what if we just make AI bots and use them as real people? I honestly don't know if Sports Illustrated is going to recover from this whole thing. Do you know the story?
I do not know the story.
So they had a bunch of their content was being created purely by AI bots, but they created fake AI headshots of people. They gave them real names and they gave them bios. And people started sniffing this out and going, this content is just like, they had no oversight, and they were just pushing content, presenting it as people. It is, like I said, I don't know if they will recover from it because of how the CEO got fired last week. I mean, it's serious stuff. And again, this is one of those, like, these are the kinds of mistakes that can happen when people go, hey, let's cut corners.
Yes.
Maybe we can just use technology. Maybe these whole people thing, they're kind of tough to work with. They're expensive. What if we just automate it? And they're paying the consequences big time. And I think, if anything, that's an encouragement to even just the way the market and society responds, that people go, no, we actually still want to hear from people. We don't want to be misled or believe that we're just interacting with a bot. We still care about the human experience. And I think that's the encouraging side of it for anybody who's still like, oh my gosh, is my company just going to wipe us out with bots? Well, they can, but it's not going to go well.
Yes, they'll regret it.
Yeah.
Except for Christopher. Christopher's completely replaceable, and everyone knows that one. Other than Christopher, everybody else is irreplaceable. We need humans.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, but so on the belonging though, I want to go back to this, because I did say I don't want to just talk about AI the whole time.
I'm with you.
Let's talk about the personalization of this, though, because I do think this is one of the challenges that organizations face as they look at this, because inevitably it is critical that engagement and belonging is going to be key. But I think some of the missteps I've observed over 2023 was organizations attempting to go, we're going to make a box called belonging, and we're going to just try and jam everyone into that box. And then when people go, well, that didn't really work for me, they're like, what the heck? Like we tried to get this belonging. And a perfect example of this to me was like the return to work policies that we saw a lot of in 2023, where companies went, well, we want you all to fit in and we all want you to work together and collaborate. So everybody has to follow this one size fits all policy. And I don't know about you, but I've watched the response from people, and people aren't like, wow, thank you. I'm so happy to feel like I have a sense of belonging and I can personalize my employment experience. And thank you for taking ownership of that on my behalf.
Yes. Thank you for assigning me the sense of belonging that you want me to have.
Right. Here's what belonging looks like for you. You've been assigned quadrant 4.
So, okay. I've lost it on a podcast where I don't think I've ever lost it completely and could speak on a live stream. So this is the first for me. So I'll tell you that
You're welcome.
one of the things in our research we saw when we asked people, did you have a work style or work sort of a situation change in the last year? People who said, oh, I went from hybrid to remote, or I went from in person to whatever. Like if you had one of those changes, yes. What did you change? And then how'd you feel? And people who said they went remote were more likely than any other group to say it was a positive change. But then 2 questions later, they're more likely than any other group to say they thought about quitting their job because of stress and burnout. And so even something remote, even though it sounds amazing, for some people it doesn't fit. And for others, it still is a change. If you've ever had a baby in your house, we've had a couple.
What? I don't. What are those?
If any of you out there have ever had a baby in your house, it is a joyful occasion, and it's also exhausting.
Yes.
Right. And will burn you out and stress you out. And the same thing's true. You're like, hey, I get to work from home. I never leave my home. So I'm working all the time and I don't have a way to unplug, and there's no way to untether here. So there's all that. Now, going back to your point, like what's the right answer for that? How do we solve that? I wish I had the magic answer. I would sell it for $1 bazillion and buy Tahiti and go retire there.
We'll create a master class, Ben. We'll create a master class, and we'll go buy
we'll give you the formula for how many
Dubai that they can't seem to populate.
Yes, we'll create the formula for how many days in office is perfect and share that out. I was on a call about 2 weeks ago, running this roundtable and just listening in to people talk about this, and there's this common conversation. Hey, our leaders want us together. They say it's important for us to be together. Our people are perfectly happy where they are, but now they're coming to the office 2 days a week because the leadership told them they had to. Well, those 2 days a week, when we have meetings, they just dial in from Zoom or Teams from their desk. They won't come to the meeting because they don't want to be here anyway. Like, so that defeats the whole purpose of being in proximity with other people. And so I said, listen, you have to advocate with your leadership, or find out why that 2 days is exactly the right amount, or say, hey, for these types of things, we're going to bring people together. They're going to be in person for half a day because it's important for these key things, and then let them work wherever else the other, 30 something hours a week, but be intentional about that. Not just, just generally having them within the same building square footprint is going to solve this problem and make everyone feel more connected and like they belong, and strike those notes.
Well, and I think we're seeing some of the things that even what I talked about earlier with the coaching, where like a good thing can actually have destructive consequences if you're not careful with it. And I think this goes back to something you said before, which consistently I see this around leadership development and manager development, is we need in organizations to do a better job of, one, putting people in positions who actually have a desire and a skill set to lead people. I think if there's anything I've talked about a lot recently in leadership development, is it's not for everybody. Like managing people, one, not managing people doesn't mean you don't lead. And not managing people doesn't mean you somehow are not successful from a career standpoint. And I think figuring out who are those people that actually do a really good job of that and enjoy that, and then how do we equip them and empower them to make some of those decisions? Because going back to it, I know plenty of managers who have been put between a rock and a hard place where they go, I actually know my teams. I know the work that needs to get done. I know the best way to do that, but I'm being told by my company, I have to enforce this with my teams. I don't even believe it, but I'm trying to figure out how to manage this line between, okay, if I do this, I'm going to lose my people. If I don't, am I
I'll
in
be the company
jeopardy?
guy.
And
Yeah.
right, like, I don't really know how to navigate this. And I get that organizations can't just go, hey, managers, just figure it all out, because that would be a fire sale. But it's one of those things of like, I think we need to work more towards that so that managers have the ability and the skills to do that really well.
I've got to post this video. I've got it saved over here to post at some point, probably in the new year. But I recorded it at an event we were doing this fall. They said, hey, we've got a little bit of extra time with the camera. You want to record something, got some fun videos, whatever, short stuff. And the one I recorded was like, hey, I was, weirded out the other day. I went to the dentist and the dentist sat down and said, oh, could you believe last week I was a receptionist? I did such a good job that they made me the dentist this week. Like, I got promoted. Like, that seems completely ludicrous. And yet that's happening right now at one of our companies where someone's good at something and like, you know what's next for you? Something that's completely different, has no relation to this job at all, and is now managing people that do the job you used to do. And
Yeah.
that kind of thing is happening right now all over the place. People are getting their end of year, like, what's next for you? Well, I guess you're going to be a manager next year. I don't know how I feel
Right.
about
You want
that.
career
But
growth? Well, I
yes,
guess we need to figure out how to put you in charge of people. And
yes, yes.
that's, it's really unfortunate. And one of the best successes I had with a company was we actually flipped the model where we said, it's a path of equal value. You can go do things and be a fantastic individual contributor, lead through other channels, continue moving up, or you can say, I actually really love leading other folks and being in charge of team dynamics and all these other things. And it wasn't a better than, worse than type of a thing. And a lot of the leadership problems actually evaporated very quickly when all of a sudden people went, wait, because we actually had people that went, I'm a people manager. I actually don't
Don't
want to
want to
be
be.
anymore. Like,
Yes.
I hate it. And it wasn't like, wow, you're a terrible person. It was like,
Mm,
oh, good for you for recognizing that.
please
Here's what
stay.
a pathway
Yes.
looks for that. Please stay, take your skills. We promoted you because you're fantastic. Then that other person that you're about to performance manage out, because it's like, hey, you're so busy building team dynamics and building a sense of belonging, you're not doing your job. It's like, I know, let's put you in charge of this group of people where that's where you're spending your time. And it was amazing how quickly the culture of the organization changed.
Gosh. So a couple things come to mind on this. There's a Linda Reese. I interviewed her a couple of years ago on the podcast, and she wrote a book called The Myth of Fit. And she said so many leaders in that first year fail out. And the immediate thing everyone says, like, oh, they just didn't fit. They just didn't fit what we expect or whatever else. And she said, how many times do we not tell them what we expect, and then they don't fit that, and then we're surprised when they fail because we haven't told them what their target is. And that happens
Yeah.
all the time. I talk so often about people who follow me, who are listening right now, are probably tired of hearing it. But when I was got my first HR job all those years ago, like, hey, we're doing a supervisor training this week. Cool. I'll sit in, listen in. How you train your supervisors? And then for 5 days, it was popping the video cassettes in. That takes me back. Pop the video cassettes in. And it was, don't do this or bad things happen. Don't do that. Here's your minimum threshold. Here's the legal requirement. And that's the entire week was just those things. And at the end, I'm like, when are we going to tell them what we expect? When are we going to set a higher bar than don't do that or bad stuff happens? And so selecting leaders, big deal. I got to interview the head of leadership selection for the Mayo Clinic. Brilliant woman. And she talked a lot about how, like, when we get those people that come in here and they think like, I am hot stuff and I'm going to be great, you're like, we immediately route you somewhere else from the leadership track because you are not going to fit. If you're shining the spotlight on yourself versus your team, we know you may perform great, but everyone else around you performs worse. And we've seen it in our data, they said. So they were very careful about that. And so that's my encouragement to anyone. Like, this is not a new problem. You and I probably talked about this before once or twice ourselves, but that's my encouragement on that one. Your point a minute ago about y'all tried this new thing. There's a company that I heard about a couple of years ago that said, we'll do a try before you buy manager option. So if you are out there and you say, I may want to be a manager, I'm not sure. Okay, we'll sign you up for the next cohort for 6 months. You have a small team. You'll do performance reviews. You will help hire new people in for interviews if there are people there. You'll do a couple of those manager things, setting schedules. At the end of that 6 months, you can say, that was kind of cool. How do I get more? Or gross, I want to go back to my job. And there's no weirdness. There's no backpedaling. Like you were saying, there's people that are like, this is not for me.
There's no shaming. There's
yes,
no like, oh, you have a black stain on your,
your only option is to leave in most companies. If you get promoted to that and you don't like it or it doesn't fit, you have to leave in order to save face. Like, oh, I left for a better opportunity. You're like, I left and went right back down to that role I was doing before. You promoted me somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, and it's, it's funny because I have a lot of conversations with people who are trying to navigate their career and figure out what they want to do. And again, I think the legacy idea of what does a successful career look like? Well, it's climbing up the corporate ladder. And so I talk to a lot of folks who are like, oh, someday I want to be a chief this or a VP of that. And I think sometimes the more conversations I have where I share, do you know what that really means though? Do you know what it really means to be responsible for making decisions that impact the lives of a lot of people? And that burden is, you start talking through these things and suddenly people go, no, maybe actually I don't. And again, not to try and discourage people from doing it. We need people who are willing to take on that task and willing to serve at that capacity. But I don't think for organizations, you're doing a service, especially when you look at the data you have around engagement, belonging. You're not doing your organization a service where you go, well, anybody who thinks that that's what career success looks like. And sometimes you got to have a hard conversation with somebody who's convinced that is the path for them. And you go, no, you would destroy the lives of the people around you unless there's a dramatic change in your skills or just the way you do it. And you're not a bad person for that. It's just the way you operate, to what you had said before.
I went on this kick about 2 years ago and I interviewed 3 or 4 people who had just recently retired, OD, HR, learning, like across that spectrum, and said, listen, looking back over your career, what do you think your legacy is? What are you most proud of? And I didn't know what I would expect here. I thought I might hear like, we had this major merger and we saw it through and success. And we implemented this big program or project or became this milestone for millions of dollars revenue. And to an individual, every single one of them, when press said, you know what, I did a lot of great stuff, but the people that I connected with and the relationships I had were the legacy that I left and the thing I'm most proud of. And that is for anyone out there listening in, like, I want to have this impact or I want to pursue this career path. Think about it less in terms of that specific target goal or job title and more about how many people can I influence positively on the way there, regardless of where you end up.
Yeah.
And you're going to look back long-term and be thankful and grateful for that path you took.
Well, and the thing about it is there's ecclesiological wisdom in this, in that no matter how big of an initiative you have, no matter how big of a, whatever thing you do in an organization, it's going to disappear. Like nobody's going to care about it at some point. And I think back to some of like the biggest things I did at GE or Abbott, where it was like, wow, it changed the world. You talk to somebody now and they're like, do you remember that thing? And they're like, what was that? Like they have no idea all the time and energy and hours poured into that. And nobody knows a thing about it. But do they remember the impact you had on people? You'll say, well, do you remember this person? Oh yeah, no, I know. And it's like, well, so in terms of the value and the sustainability, and to your point, the legacy you lead, it's about the people. But I think what's interesting is a lot of times this conversation happens for managers. And one of the things that I think AI is pushing to the top is it's not just managers, it's everyone. And it was interesting. I have a podcast coming out in 2024 where I'm talking to someone who works specifically, it's a very niche category. He advises PE/VC firms who are acquiring tech companies. And do you know what one of the biggest valuation indicators are for how valuable the tech company is?
Is it the leadership team?
It's the soft skills of their tech talent.
Okay.
The soft skills of the tech talent is one of the biggest valuation figures, not their technical skills, how good they are at coding, but how good the technical team is at communicating, collaborating, problem solving, the way they work with each other, they actually assess that and they go, that will be one of the highest determining factors of financial success for that tech company. And so when they're vetting it, they're actually assessing this over even like, well, how big is the product? How many customers do you have? They're actually going, what is the skill set? And it's the soft skills of the technical team that's actually a huge value driver, which I was like, well, it doesn't surprise me one bit, but it's interesting to hear from that lens somebody go, yeah, isn't that weird that that's how we're actually vetting an evaluation, adding an evaluation of a tech company is how good are the soft skills of their individual contributing technologists?
Yes.
Like, well, there you go.
I hear that from some of the people that I know in that space too, whether they're investing or they're advising investors or they're helping companies take over other companies. Like they always go and look at some of those things like the soft skills piece there. Look at the leadership team and how well they get along. I was talking to somebody this morning actually in that space. He said, listen, when this acquisition happened a few years ago, the very first thing that investor said was, what, I don't care what else happens, the very first week, this person has to be gone. Because right now they are a drain, a drag, they're holding people back. And whenever anyone in the room has a good idea, they shut it down because it's not their idea. And they're holding this company back. They could have been worth twice this by now because this person is hampering that. They've got to be gone. And so you see that play out a lot. And I'm not surprised.
No, but I think it goes back to why this investment in our human interpersonal relational skills, it's not just for managers. I mean, I've seen an individual contributor tank the culture of a team because of how they behave. And so it's one of those things for people who are looking to thrive in 2024 and beyond, based on the data you're saying about engagement and belonging and all this stuff. It's like, if you really want to invest in durable skills that are going to differentiate you, it seems pretty consistent. Whether you want to go the people manager track where you're actually accountable and responsible for that, where that is the primary way you're incentivized and rewarded, or whether you go, I don't want to carry that burden, but I just want to be a really distinguished, valuable employee to the company. That's a consistent theme across the board.
I have one or two more data points I can throw at you if you want to hear them on that mobility piece. We talked about that earlier a little bit, and then we kind of skipped around. It's kind of come up a couple times in the conversation today. Two of the data points that were interesting to me, one of them ties back to your AI piece, and one of them ties back to belonging, I would say. One of them was when we ask the workforce, do you have visibility in the opportunities that are available inside your organization right now? If you wanted to grow, do you have visibility in that? And women were 50% more likely than men to say, I don't really see them. I'm not really aware of them, what those are. So for employers like, we're going to work on our DEI or our belonging, we're going to figure those things out. There's you an answer, make them more visible to everyone, not just a select group of people. The other stat that really got me though, we asked, if you as a worker and you had a choice, where would you go to explore career paths, learn more? Would you prefer to go to your manager? Would you prefer to go to like an AI driven platform? Like, where would you want to go first just to explore and understand? And you kind of smile, like, they would rather go 80% more likely to prefer some sort of self-service private way to explore this before they go talk to their manager. And so that's the thing that sticks out to me is AI in that case isn't replacing anything. It's giving the person a little more visibility, a little more opportunity to understand what's out there. And once they've seen, okay, here's two paths. Okay, Christopher, hey, you're my leader. You know me better than anybody. I've been thinking about what's next for me, and these are two paths that I found. What do you think might be a better fit for me and why? And having that conversation is way better than saying, hey, I'm thinking about leaving. And Christopher's like,
what do you think?
I'm shutting down. Yeah, like I'm suddenly withdrawing all support from you. Like, even if you have best of intentions, like I'm happy for you, you still, it may not know what to advise them on. But if someone comes and says, hey, I've got these options, you can give them some ideas, some advice, some recommendations as a leader, or even as a friend coming to you with those sorts of things. So it makes them a more informed buyer, if you want to look at it that way, for what their next career option could be. So there's some good things in the data saying that AI can help us to make that more fair, to make that more equitable when we're looking for opportunities, which excites me because every time I speak on AI, the first question is, what about bias? I'm like, yes, it's a possibility, but there's other things like this that say, let's make this more equitable. Let's level the playing field.
Well, and I think the thing that with that one, because so two things reacting to what you said there. One, I think it's a fantastic way to, so first of all, one, I hope that we see those statistics change over time as companies put more emphasis on managers, because if managers really are doing a good job of building a place of belonging and trust in a team, while yes, people still may find value in AI helping them kind of know what's possible, but I actually think that's an indication of how much more room we have to grow people managers to say, hey, you should be creating a culture where you have a team that's comfortable saying, I'm kind of wrestling with where I am right now, and I'm struggling with what to do, and I trust you enough to know me having this conversation with you isn't going to go, oh, well, if there's layoffs, I know who's on the list, type of a thing. But instead be like, wow, like, let's talk about that. Like, what about your job today are you struggling with? Where do you feel like you could do more, type of a thing? So I think there will be room, but I agree that AI can be really helpful when you're in that stage of, I'm just thinking. Like, I'm just thinking. I'm not necessarily thinking of acting, but I'm early in that stage of trying to figure out. I think AI can be a great way to say, I'm just brainstorming some stuff. And it's a safe place. I can't remember where I saw it, but statistically, is weird. And I think it's a sad state on our interpersonal skills. But people are more comfortable sharing personal details and asking questions to AI than to even their spouse, which to me, I'm like, whoa, we are way off the mark in terms of things. But I think it's a state of, hey, can it be a good place to go to start those conversations so long as it's building towards that? But the other thing with the bias piece, I see a lot of that and I hear a lot of that stuff, and it's legitimate. It's legitimate. But I think one of the things that I liken it to is back when I would talk to CIOs when cloud was just coming out, and people would go, well, cloud is so unsecure. And I would go, are you saying your on-prem stuff is totally buttoned up and locked down? And they're like, well, no. And you're like, okay, so you're extremely vulnerable internally, but you're afraid of the cloud. And I think the bias thing is a real thing. And it's like, yes, we need to be aware that AI is biased, but we can't pretend people aren't. And that by saying like, hey, go talk to this person and get their advice. You think they're not biased? You think they don't have it? Type of a thing. So we need to see it in that sense and go, okay, so how do we use wisdom and discernment, knowing that biases exist? How do we make sure we're, navigating that and making sure people have the right tools to make sure that they're not getting the wrong advice? But I think we can't just go, well, AI is biased. Yeah, AI is built on people. Where do you think it learned to be biased? So thinking like, well, let's count on people, that's not necessarily going to solve the problem.
Yes. I can't audit why Christopher made a decision, but I can audit why AI made a decision. And I can go in there and adjust and tweak and change or eliminate factors, things like that. There was I know we're getting close on time. I gave this great, maybe we're not, if we got 3 more hours ahead. I gave this metaphor the other day because it was so helpful for me. Have you ever thought yourself, like, it'd be really cool to have a photographic memory? Have you ever had that thought in your head? Because I've known lots of people that are like, photographic memory, that'd be kind of like a cool superpower to have, to remember anything and to be able to come back to that and reference it, because we forget things. But the problem with someone who has a photographic memory is they can't generalize. So you can say, hey, earlier this year we had a chat about this, and a person who has a photographic memory is like, I remember the day, the time, where we were, what we talked about, like down to the nitty-gritty details. They have to remember those things. They can't generalize. And AI is in some ways very similar. Like, it has to have an answer, and it can't say, you know what, generally this is probably the right thing, and we're going to give this a directional, and I'm not completely sure. It's like, this is totally the right way to go. Even if it's wrong, it's completely, certain of that answer that it gives. And so I'm kind of like, there's some interesting parallels.
Well,
there.
no, and it's funny you bring that, because when you said that, like, wouldn't it be fine? Have I ever thought that? I don't think that at all. Like, I've never been like, I really wish I remembered every detail about everything. I would just, my brain would explode. But it is funny you bring that up, because I had a conversation with Kevin Saras, and I actually just posted a clip from it on YouTube that was like, AI will give you a very convincing answer that is incredibly wrong. And that's one of the biggest dangers is, it's like, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? And it's like, this. And it's going to say it in a way that you're like, wow, I mean, I guess that really sounds like a very convincing argument to do it. And I think that's why we do have to be really careful with this. But if anything, when the AI boom kicked off in November of last year, I was really kind of observant to see where it was going to go. And I think, if anything, over the last 13 months, to me, it's only further highlighting how important the unique capabilities that people bring to the table are, and how underserved and undervalued we've made them. And I think that's probably the scariest part, is that it's like, we're a lot worse at them than we thought. And so the whole skill crisis of, we got a long ways to go to build these things up. And some of the things that we've put a lot of value on before, I mean, just honestly, look at the technical field. People were like, I'm untouchable. I'm the best software engineer in the world. 12 months later, I can't find a job to save my life because Gen 4 of OpenAI can code better than I can, or with an amateur can get to where I mean, it's changing things. And what was valuable is invaluable. And what we thought was nice to have is suddenly becoming critical.
Critical, for sure.
So, well, I do feel like we could just like pivot and be like, you know what? And now what do we do? HR summer school.
Right,
it's an HR summer school. Just doing an unexpected HR summer school for the rest of the afternoon type of thing. No, I won't do that to you because you were so kind to jump on with me last minute. But Ben, I thoroughly always enjoy the analytical and data side that you bring and the research you bring to this, because it's always fun when you're like, I am pretty sure this is where things are going. And then you hear the data and you're like, all right, boom, okay, I'm not crazy. Yeah.
I've told you, I love knowing it. And even if I find out that I was completely wrong, I'm like, okay, but at least now I know. And so I'm always excited to see what's new there.
Yeah. Well, that's what you found out. Yeah.
Thank you for letting me join you.
I appreciate, as always. All right. Well, thank you again, Ben, for joining me. Thanks, everybody who stuck around and listened to our crazy conversation that we always have. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your week and a wonderful rest of the year. It's going to be a wild and exciting 2024. So if you want to stay at the front of it, make sure you're subscribed to my Substack. And I'll try and keep you abreast to what's going on in the world. So thanks, Ben. Thanks, everybody. Hope you have a wonderful, wonderful week.